Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this information session about the Racial Equity Education Focused Roundtable for 2021-2022. My name is Sarah Murphy, and I'm here with my colleague David Dwight. We're going to share a bunch of information, and then at the end, we'll open it up for some conversation and questions. So let's jump in. All right. So today is February 26, 2021. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you again for joining us bright and early. This morning, we will do some introductions of ourselves and of Cohort through Ferguson, talk a little bit about our why that grounds the roundtable, and then we'll give some information and how to apply. And then at the end, we'll do an activity. So we learned quickly that equity work calls on us to better understand the personal relationships between our experiences as individuals and the policies and systems that build and shape St. Louis. So first, let us start by telling you our stories and introducing the Racial Equity Capacity Building team. Fabra Hemphill is not here today. She is the Director of Racial Equity Capacity. She is fantastic. We cannot speak for her, but I can share that she has been a huge part of my story, of my path to racial equity, my journey in this learning. Her wisdom and leadership are key, and she will be a leader in the Racial Equity Roundtable when it kicks off in July. Like I said, my name is Sarah Murphy. I use she, her pronouns. My story started in St. Louis. I was born and raised here. I went to Clayton schools. I was a beneficiary of all of the wonderful opportunities and resources afforded to me as a white woman born in Clayton. And I was always the kind of kid who asked why, like, why are things this way? Why is St. Louis the way that it is? Why at the height of the desegregation program is it so much harder for me to make robust connections with my Black fellow students who live in St. Louis City? And so as I continued to ask those questions, I continued to investigate. I went out into the world away from Clayton and realized what a unique situation it is. And I continued to ask questions. That landed me in graduate school to learn about educational advocacy and policy. So I moved to New York on August 4th, 2014. And on August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed by Darren Wilson in Ferguson. And I watched on Twitter and the news media two very different stories unfolding. I watched my friends being tear gassed on the streets. And I said to my mom, I want to go home. I want to be in Ferguson. And my mom said, no, you will sit down and you will finish your master's degree and you will come back and find a way to plug in. And so fast forward, now I'm working with Cohort through Ferguson, excited to be thinking about how we all plug in and how we think about systems change. Specifically, my passion is education. So I'm excited to be here with you today. David, will you share your story?
Absolutely. It's really, really wonderful to be here with you all. And I'm putting a little something into the chat for you all to bring yourself into the space too. So we'd love for you to share your name, organization, district, school, and your role in the chat. So my name is David Dwight IV. I'm the lead strategy catalyst and executive director at Cohort through Ferguson. I've been in this role for 2 years and been with the organization since its founding 5 years ago, and then worked with the Ferguson.
I'm happy to share.
And so when I think about education particularly, I think about it through the lens of the two sides of my family and their very differing experiences with education. And on my dad's side of the family, which from Jacksonville, Florida, there's actually quite a history of my family being able to graduate, attend higher education, but at also really great prices. And it's well known within my family, the stories of threats and other violence that occurred for them to achieve that kind of education. And then on my mother's side, when my mom was the first to have any type of higher education, and all of the women before her in my family only had a third grade education, because as brilliant and wonderful and incredible as they were, because of access barriers, because of the environments in which they grew up. And so it's kind of through those two stories that I engage in this work, and have been so privileged and humbled through the work of the Ferguson Commission to meet with all the thousands of community members that were engaged in that year-long process. And education was always at the tip of everybody's tongue, of families, of residents, of youth. And I just wanted to also share about Fabra, and the reason we're really excited for her leadership in this program is that she is a lifelong educator and has quite a bit of experience both in an academic setting, but also in a school setting as a teacher and as an administrator. So we're really thankful to have her wisdom in this space.
So thank you for sharing a little bit about yourselves in the chat. At the end, we'll get a more of a chance to share more about each other. For the purposes of right now, we're recording this so it can be a public resource. And so we're going to move through the information a little bit quickly, and then we'll stop recording at the end and open it up to have a discussion together. So that's a little bit about our personal why, and I'm going to hand it over to David to talk about Forward Through Ferguson's why.
Yeah, so as some of you may know, the work of Forward Through Ferguson began with the Ferguson Commission and the 16 volunteer community members spanning a wide variety of sectors and belief systems who were brought together after by the governor at that time, Governor Nixon, after the killing of Michael Brown Jr. in Ferguson, Missouri, and the community uprising that called for something to happen. And so the commission really took up this call to confront and engage with that deep community pain that the region was experiencing, and that the uprising was making sure we couldn't ignore after that killing, and to really engage with it deeply and name not just the symptoms of racial inequity, but the deep root causes. And so the commission, while named for the events of Ferguson, we all know that these root causes span much farther than one municipality and are no way isolated to one suburb. The commission held over 70 public meetings that incorporated the insights of over 3,000 community members who all told contributed 30,000 hours of their wisdom, their pain, their grief, their hope, their vision for what a different St. Louis could look like. And that is what was the basis of the Ferguson Commission report. And so that process really made it clear that for decades, we had these siloed systems that had allowed and were still allowing racial equity to fall through the cracks. And so the commission's 189 policy calls to action were really aimed at starting to change those systems to close those cracks. And they spanned youth at the center, opportunity to thrive, and justice for all. And we really taken to saying, when people say, wow, 189 is a lot, it really is, there's one central call to action that in all of our spaces and places and spheres of influence, St. Louis has to deal with our racial inequities. And here's some data and some first steps for how you can get in where you fit in and move it forward. And so as some of you all may have seen, we've been doing quite a bit of conversation, data, and research work in this space. This is from the Still Separate, Still Unequal tool. And here are a few key data visualizations from that. And we know that segregation is growing in most of the region's school districts. This graph shows the dissimilarity index score, which is a measure of segregation. It's the percentage of the groups that would have to move to a different geographic area in order for us to have a St. Louis region that was spread and reflective of the underlying population. And so you can see with these increasing lines, the blue, the yellow, and the purple, that we're getting more segregated as a region, closer to segregation before and in the time of Brown v. Board of Education. We know on average that majority white districts receive more funding per student than majority Black districts, to the tune of on average $2,000 per student per year. And the same pattern applies to per pupil expenditures per year. And we also know that this has big impacts in the educational environments for students. We found the majority white districts offer twice as many AP courses and Algebra 2 and calculus classes than majority Black districts. And while all majority white districts offered calculus classes, just under half of majority Black districts didn't offer any calculus classes. And this is a really high level touch on some of the data work in that still separate, still unequal tool. And we really encourage you to dig further in it. But we also really, it's part of our ethos that we combine data with storytelling and with voices of residents. And so this is from Amanda Cologne-Smith, a St. Louis City resident in Dutchtown. And we know that these inequities strengthen a still separate, still unequal set of pipelines to racial inequity. We know we're preaching to the choir here, and you all are on this call because you're engaged in racial equity work and you want to deepen your practice, and you want to do it in community and in a supportive environment that can bring us to the next level. And as Amanda says here, we know schools are a critical part of our social fabric, telling us about so much about how we truly value each other. What we prepare and provide for our children is sacred work in building our future. And so that's a lot of what this education equity roundtable is about. Utilizing some of what we've learned as Forward through Ferguson about what it means for institutions to effectively implement racial equity and get impact from it, combined with so much of this community wisdom and insight about education and education inequity in the region. And ultimately, we always start with how it affects people of color directly, but we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the ways that racial inequity makes us a less thriving region overall. UMSL did a study that found in 2012 that the St. Louis region lost out on almost $14 billion of GDP, our measure of our economy, because of gaps in income by race. We redid that analysis a couple years ago and found that that gap had increased to $17 billion. That was 10% of our regional economy at that time, and doesn't even count economic gaps due to a variety of other factors, from graduation rates to healthcare costs, and on and on. And so at Forward through Ferguson, our job is being born out of the Ferguson Commission to really respond to that vocal community desire for the momentum to not stop, for it to continue on, make sure that report doesn't gather dust, and to mobilize and work with accountable bodies and leaders at accountable bodies across the region to really activate and catalyze these equitable systems and policies to close those gaps that the Commission found were endemic in St. Louis. And so we define racial equity as a state in which a person's life outcomes cannot be predicted by race. Many of you have likely seen this definition or have your own definitions that you work with, but really focusing in on that systems transformation aspect of it. It's both an outcome, but also a process by which we live by and a set of principles by which we operate our systems. And this is the last kind of little bit about Forward through Ferguson before we get into closer to some of the racial equity capacity building part of it. But we really live into this mission through a three-pronged action strategy. Action strategies around advocating for policy systems change, building racial equity capacity, which is what we're going to talk more about today, and then really making sure that we're investing in the human as well as financial capital that will be needed to sustain this generational work for long-term change, right? Urgent things to change and do today, but a generational path that we're on. And so those three action strategies combined with this right heart set, because how we show up matters, will allow us to achieve 2039 as St. Louis, where racial equity is the reality, a generation after the murder of Michael Brown. And so we're really excited to dive a little bit more into the Racial Equity Roundtable as part of that Build Racial Equity Capacity strategy. And the main components of that are to really cultivate and activate a network of leaders for racial equity, facilitate long-term change within institutions, and then also really develop strong measures of impact, progress, and to amplify successes across the region so that we can learn and improve together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. So in that capacity, Forward through Ferguson does not operate as a diversity and inclusion trainer or practitioner. Rather, we are facilitators. So we were created to carry forth the community insight and vision of the Ferguson Commission, which identified the need for defining the path for individuals, institutions, and the region at large to move from awareness of racial inequities towards transformational action that eliminates those inequities. And so Ford through Ferguson acts as a wayfinder. And we define wayfinder, excuse me, as helping people and institutions find their starting point, strategize their journey forward, create next practices, and discover how to be a radically accountable partner in systems change. So that's really at the heart of the Roundtable. We develop capacity building tools, and we create the container for practitioners in your respective spaces to come together and problem solve and think about how you can develop your next best steps. And so part of that, we really value community visioning on a St. Louis defined by racial equity. So it offers us a North Star to guide our racial equity transformation and justice work. And so we'll have some time at the end for you to activate your own visions for a transformed St. Louis. But for now, we have this to offer from Erica Williams, a Ferguson resident, pictured here with a beautiful family. And she says, when asked, what would education equity look and feel like? She says, the districts with the most high needs students would receive equal to or more funding, and funding would not be predicated upon property taxes within that district. Our children would receive all of the necessary services pursuant to their individual education plans, and they would have access to high quality educational materials and opportunities. It's so important because educational equity is racial equity. I get chills reading that and I love thinking about these visions. And so it's so powerful to bring together these visions and not only talk about them, but what the steps are to get to achieving them. And so the racial equity capacity building team led by Faber Hempel, and I do support work for them. David and I support in facilitation of these offerings, as well as we have a bench of skilled facilitators. We offer these different things, different workshops, systems change primers, and you can find all of those on our website. But today we are going to talk about the Racial Equity Roundtable. All right, so David, would you like to share the major components of the Roundtable?
Absolutely. So the Roundtable has four key components to it across this 8-month membership journey, where the cohort will meet monthly, and then have a little bit of intermediate work to kind of activate on the learnings that are happening in the actual cohort. So first up is case study creation. So each participating institution will complete a guided racial equity case study that examines its organizational history, current landscape of the work within the institution, the strengths, and also really think deeply about the challenges and barriers to forward movement within the institution. We've iterated on this case study model across 3 different cohorts of Roundtable, and it's a really, really powerful tool and guided tool for deep reflection. Second is resource generation. So an institutional case study and discussion will then be synthesized to generate new knowledge, approaches, and tools for Roundtable members to leverage and support their work. There'll be intergroup dialogue. So across these monthly Roundtable discussions, they include reflections, readings, dialogue on racial equity, as well as topics very specific to the field of pre-K-12 education. And FTF facilitators will also be holding affinity groups. And some of this intergroup dialogue will also be in reflection on those case studies that are shared with the full group. And then lastly, but importantly, this is really about community building. So while the Roundtable is providing space for shared learning about foundational racial equity work, there's also a really intentional focus on cultivating trust, building meaningful relationships across institutions, and also strategizing the practice of radical collaboration between education leaders. Part of the reason we started these Roundtables is because we were interacting as Ford through Ferguson, inheriting a lot of the relationships at the Ferguson Commission with so many amazing catalysts for equity and justice that often felt really isolated, whether that might be within their institution or across the region in the work that they were trying to do. And so that community building aspect of it is really one of the foundational parts of it. And so we have a testimonial or two from some of our participants, which it's been so we're still in the midst of the current cross-sector roundtable. They have one more meeting next week. And so I'm smiling because I'm thinking about them. But this is a quote from one of them. The Racial Equity Roundtable has given us the chance to further operationalize our commitments. The content that was shared throughout has been thought-provoking and super applicable.
Yeah, so thank you, David, for that overview. And your smile made me smile thinking about them. It really, truly the community building aspect. I look forward to the sessions every month. And so in the education focused roundtable, it'll be 8 months starting in July. And so that is designed to go along with the planning before the school year and then end in February, so that then you have some time in the school year to perhaps do some implementing or start with your planning for the next year. So what will you get? What outcomes do we focus on? So we think about leadership development. So we leverage anti-bias, anti-racist, and systems change strategies to think about how we can help you as leaders develop yourself and develop capacity to take up this work within your context, whether it be a school district or an institution that supports schools. Like David said, in-depth case studies. So the participating institutions will each bring together a case study, and with that, do problem solving practices together. And this type of skill building and problem solving, kind of putting your heads together, is really the meat of the roundtable. We do a baseline and a growth racial equity capacity assessment. So the participants from each organization take an assessment at the beginning and in the last session. So you'll be able to get a feel for what operationalizing, like the testimonial said, racial equity means right now, and be thinking about all the parts in your organization. And then at the end, see how you've grown. And a accountable, radically collaborative network of organizational leaders. We pair up organizations so that between each monthly session, you meet with your accountability partner to grapple with the ideas that we're talking about, to say, gosh, this part of it is really hard, or this thing is really activating, and I'm struggling with this with my staff or with my co-leaders. And so you can have some support and further problem solving between sessions to build relationships and build that network. So one more testimonial from the current participant. The roundtable has helped us in thinking through and working to establish continued ongoing practices to habitualize and establish expectations of centering racial equity in both our individual behavior and our organizational work. So if that sounds great to you, I hope it does. How should you apply? We'll go over some key points and then run through the application itself before we open up for questions. So application overview. So we invite you to bring 2 to 3 representatives per institution. We ask that at least one of them is somebody in a leadership position who has policy influence. So someone who's either a decision maker or at decision-making tables about how policy works in your institution. And then think about one with key cultural influence. And by that, we mean somebody who's someone that folks go to for advice, or someone whose opinion is highly respected in your institution, in your community. And so we ask that so that the work that we do here is brought back and really braided into what is happening within your institution. The application is due by March 26th. And so you can find that by visiting this link. David, will you drop that link in the chat, please? And then the membership fees are $7,000 per institution, which sounds like a lot, or could sound like a lot. And for that, you're getting 8 sessions for 2 to 3 people, and each session is 3 hours long. And we have limited scholarships available on a case-by-case basis, and those will be preferenced for the districts or institutions most harmed by funding formulas and racial segregation. So if you're not sure if that applies to you, reach out. We can talk to you, certainly on a case-to-case basis. And so those are the fees. Those are the big high-level points. And now let's go take a few minutes to go over the application itself. Switch over. So in this beautifully designed PDF with these gorgeous faces of folks who are part of the community, you'll find this and much of what we just went over in the presentation, you can read in depth. So if this went by really fast, please come back and read it word for word. Want to give a shout out to Dr. Kira Hudson-Banks, who is formative in the first roundtable and continues to be informative of the processes that we do. So again, please go through and read all of this good stuff about the history of it. And in it, there are links to Ford through Ferguson's SGL 2039 action plan, the Still Separate, Still Unequal tool, and the state of education reform that we referenced with all the data. So again, on your at your leisure, please peruse those resources as you like. Okay, so to go over eligibility again. So thinking about this cohort, we invite leaders in the sector of pre-K through 12 educational institutions. And so this includes traditional public school districts, charter school networks, parochial and private schools or independent institutions, governmental education agencies, education-focused nonprofits, and institutions with a vested interest in the health of pre-K through 12 education systems. And so we wanted that to be broad because we recognize that this is a diverse network of institutions and people who create the system of education, and all of us influence each other. All parts matter to each other. And in St. Louis, part of our mission is to help bridge silos that are in place perhaps between these institutions, even though you all are so vital to each other's success. So we ask that you do read the resources we offer before you come, and it will support you in the process and in the group formation of moving through from awareness into understanding and towards transformation. So we ask that you send a team of 2, as well as one alternate or substitute participant in case somebody can't come to a certain session, but we ask that there are 2 representatives at least from the institution every session. Here's an overview of the timeline, key dates. So they opened last week. They're due March 26th. We will go through the applications that come in and select the institutions that will make up the cohort, and we'll let you know by April 26th. So then when we accept you, we'll send you a packet of information that we ask that you review with your leadership and send back by May 14th. Then make initial deposit or partial payment by June 21st. And then it kicks off on July 9th. And here are the dates. July, once a month, second Friday of the month through February 2022. Overview of the fees. So a brief word about evaluation. We focus on evaluation because we want to be able to discuss impact. We want you to understand the impact that it's had on you. We want to be able to go back to the people that we're accountable to and say the things that we're doing are impacting the community. And so we ask these key questions. To what extent has participation changed participants' perceived and actual racial equity leadership and problem-solving skills? Is this being an effective program? To what extent has it developed a community of practice, a community of racial equity advocates? In what ways have the racial equity roundtable institutions changed as a result of their involvement in the program? And to what extent have we done what we said we were going to do? To what extent have we implemented it as planned? And we also do formative assessments. So to support us in responding to the needs of the group, we ask that at the end of each session, you do a short reflection form. And that helps us respond to what you need and to adjust course to make it a better program for each specific cohort. So within the big boundaries of our goals, we make significant alterations between each session. Okay, so submit it to us when you're done, but here's the bulk of what the actual application work is. We ask for some basic information about your institution, about who's coming to the table, about what your role or stake in pre-K through 12 is, your institution type, and then this is kind of the beginning of your case study. So everything else on the application is about you assessing your own institution to say, where are we? What's our baseline for coming to the roundtable? And so this is where we're not judging. This isn't going to be part of us evaluating if you're welcome at the roundtable. You are all welcome, but it's us thinking about like, where are you starting in terms of your awareness of who is in your institution, who's in leadership of your institution, what data disaggregated by race looks like. And if you don't have that information, that's a data point. That's just information about where you're starting, and that's okay too. The application questions really are the beginning of your case study. So think about this as you're doing it. They're in-depth questions, but it's like getting a jump start to the case study formation, which will be the bulk of the work at the roundtable. So we ask that you write 4 pages. We don't need a PhD dissertation, but 4 pages about these questions, about your specific goals and intended outcomes about becoming racially equitable. So how do you think participation will support you in achieving those goals? Are the institution's racial equity goals incorporated into a strategic plan right now? If so, let us know how. Have the board and staff made a formal commitment? So that can also be tailored to your specific type of institution, but has the leadership, have the key stakeholders really made a commitment? If so, please describe what efforts you've undertaken to date. What resources? When we talk about racial equity, we always talk about resource flows. What budget has been allocated to this? What human resources, what time has been allocated to this? What community resources have been allocated to this? And how are you evaluating how effective those efforts have been? If the institution has conducted a racial equity assessment, what tool was used? What were the key highlights? What did you learn? If you haven't, how has the institution recognized and decided to pursue racial equity as relevant to the leadership and operations? And then who's responsible? So if you've made a plan, who are the accountable actors? If the institution is asking for outside help by employing a consultant, who's that consultant, and how have they been helping you? And finally, how do you see your institution's work aligned with the Ford through Ferguson's action plan and the region's equity indicators? And so we ask this to just encourage you to step outside of your own institution's lane and think about how you're fitting in to the region overall and how you might be contributing to everybody rowing in the same direction, as it were, towards racial equity. There's also a section that if in the event that you were at a previous racial equity roundtable, how did it impact you? And based on your experience, what would you need coming to the roundtable again? We share this because we invite people to come more than once. This session, we had some repeat attendees, which was fantastic. We did make them go first in the case study process because they had kind of a head start. But their learning and their perspective as being in this process a little bit longer, intentionally a little bit longer, has been huge in terms of supporting the rest of the team. So you can do it as many times as you want. This isn't a graduate and move on. This is a forever journey, and we welcome everyone, no matter where you are along the path. And last part of the application is the participation agreement. We ask that this is a conscious decision and that this is a conscious decision of everyone to come to the community and to join the community intentionally. And so the elements of this participation agreement are about, is the application happening in a silo? We want it to be really part of the full leadership team's effort, even though only 2 to 3 people are coming to the table. So we want everyone to be aware. We want you to be consciously committing. Yes, I'm eager to learn. I'm here, I'm coming to the table, and I'm gonna lean into discomfort. I'm gonna engage with the materials, and I'll be an active participant. We strive for 100% participation, but we can commit to at least 80% because we know life happens, but that we are upholding our commitment by putting a plan B in place and making sure that there's somebody who's an alternative participant who we're talking to about it along the way and who can plug in when life happens and the team needs to shift course. And then we ask that each of those people signs it, commits to it, dates it, just as a way in good faith to say to us, we are here to come to the table and we're excited about it. And that I agree to all the above statements. And that what you've shared is true. It's really just a signal of integrity. So that was a lot of information all at once. Let's open up to questions, or did I miss anything? David, would you like to add anything?
No, didn't miss anything. Thanks for running through the application. And yeah, we would love to, if there are any questions about the structure of the program or about the application or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Sarah, you can stop the share for this part.
Oh, yeah.
You should have ability to unmute yourself, so please feel free to unmute and start talking.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Angela.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Yeah, thank you. So at one point I froze, so you may have covered this and I missed it, but I'm wondering, do we have the benefit of accessing information that came out of the session ahead of us?
Well, that's a great question.
That is a great question. In some aspects, we have planned for that. So part of each, as Sarah was saying, we were really responsive to each cohort. So we have a base kind of curriculum and readings and tools that we work out of, but we've grown it based on what they've inputted and asked for. And so you will benefit from that aspects of it. And some of the learnings that we've had from them have actually informed like new tools that FTF has created. So there would be benefit there. I think it would be interesting to think about maybe one of the institutions would be willing to share their case study or.
Yeah, I have visions for some case study storytelling and then follow up for, a year after you graduate, as it were, you complete the program. So thinking about FTF's storytelling component, definitely, in addition to everything David just said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat about logistics. Are you imagining the sessions to be in person or via Zoom, or are you still deciding? We're going to go with still Zoom for now until we can know that everybody is vaccinated and comfortable. So I think slow going. Also, we've really found a groove in Zoom, I think, in the sessions. And I think that it's really opened up some deeper participation because people don't need to travel to get to us. So it's been good. We've been able to lean into that so far. So we also have been hearing from our participants that it hasn't impacted their experience negatively. Of course, it's always, there's water cooler and coffee conversations that can't happen, but it's still been a substantially positive experience. Angela, you had a question?
Yeah, I wondered about, with your experience so far with the groups that you've done, have you found that this program is more successful for an organization at a certain point of progress in the continuum? Like for what type of organization, not the structure of the institution, right, but in their journey in pursuing racial equity, is it most helpful? Or do you have a wide range of folks who are just starting and folks who are far, far along?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. And we talk about it in terms of our Path to Racial Equity spectrum tool. So awareness, building analysis, understanding, and then transforming towards equity. And then that happens at different levels. We say it's not for people who have not started their awareness journey. So don't have to have had racial equity assessments or had, organization-wide training or have done some kind of super intense effort, but we do ask that there's been some initial investment or some initial like naming of it as a priority, and maybe some team within that's thinking about it, but it really, it doesn't have to be super advanced. And we found that the cohort actually benefits from having people at a variety of places across the spectrum, because a lot of this work is like cyclical. You know, we may get to transformation in one aspect of our organization's development or systems or structures, but another area of our work, you know, it's been our hiring and HR practices have really had to go across the spectrum. But then when it comes to, you know, our board and how our board is thinking about this work, you know, it really needs to come back through. So we found that it's actually beneficial to have people across the spectrum in this particular one. In some of our other trainings, they're kind of targeted more for, you know, you've achieved this much and now you're ready for this. But this one I think is a little bit better for across the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this cohort specifically, we definitely had a big range, and you know, from an organization led by one of the co-chairs of the Ferguson Commission to a new organization that, excuse me, is still discovering and figuring out what their mission is. And so wherever you are, it's helpful. Like David said, we are consistently working on it, and that's why we ask you to engage with the materials that we list, so that you have some baseline just of vocabulary. That said, we do in the first sessions do some level setting to make sure that within the group we have some shared language. So yeah, everyone's welcome as long as you're willing to dig in and do the homework.
Any other questions?
These are great questions. I love questions.
It's just the anticipated size of the group?
Oh yeah, so I think we're shooting for a cohort of 10 organizations. So 20 to 26 people, just about. We found that that's optimal.
Yeah, we found that in person, we actually used to have these that were like 15 to 20 institutions. 20 used to be our max. And, you know, in person, you can kind of manage dynamics a little bit better than on Zoom. So we want to make sure it's like a really impactful, like oriented for Zoom experience, which is why we shrink it down a little bit and are really aiming for more like 10 to like Sarah said, 10 to 13, maybe up to 15.
Sorry, I'm going to keep going. And who do we contact for questions as we're going through filling it out?
Yeah, so let me put up a slide with our connect. It's me or David. So it's Sarah at Forward Through Ferguson or David at forwardthroughferguson.org. All right. So for the recording, please check out the application, connect with us, submit again. Let's see, it's at.
And so,
yeah, it's at the bit.ly/ed_RERT 2021. So please share with your partners, encourage them to join us. And like we were saying, please invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial equity capacity, no matter where your starting point is.
And so we have a little activity for those that are able to stay on for the last 15 minutes, but we always really love to kind of end with this culture of trying piece, because it's such a deep core principle of how we approach our racial equity work. And it's so racial equity is really a culture shift away from business as usual. And even that alone won't get us to equity. Equity requires us to not only shift our culture, but also transform our structures and institutions. And so a hallmark of our work is about synthesizing and sharing out on how we're trying to live into that desire to do things differently. Here's one example of how we've done that in the Ferguson Commission report, in this culture of trying. We know that there are risks to trying, that there are no guarantees that every practice that we try will be successful, but we know that the very act of trying changes the odds. And so our commitment to you all here today, to our roundtable participants in this education one, as well as the cross-sector one, and to all of our partners, is that Forward Through Ferguson is here to help and to support you and the region as we try. And we're really excited and passionate about, and it's our profession to travel down that path with you. So really, really thankful to have you all here. And with that, I'll stop the recording.